Winter doesn't echo. It absorbs sound, muffling the world until all you can hear is the blood in your own ears. But sometimes in that profound silence, you hear things you aren't supposed to. Things that have been waiting for the snow to fall, just to get closer without making a sound. These are stories from that silence. Real stories from people who looked out into the endless white and saw something looking back. Tonight's first story comes from a guy named Mark. He just moved into his first house in a quiet suburban cul-de-sac. It was late December, and the first major blizzard of the season had just hit. The world outside was buried. For him, this was perfect. No work, a fully stocked fridge, and a new gaming console. The first night was pure bliss. The heat was humming. The only light came from the TV screen, and outside, a thick blanket of fresh, untouched snow covered everything. It felt safe, sealed off from the world. He played for hours, headset on, completely lost in the game. Around 2 a.m, he paused to grab a drink from the kitchen. The moment he slid the headset off his ears, the silence of the house hit him. It was a heavy, weighted quiet that only a blizzard brings. And in that quiet, he heard it. A soft crunch. He froze, listening. It came again. Crunch. A long pause. Then another crunch. It was the unmistakable sound of someone walking through deep snow. But it was faint, right on the edge of hearing. He crept to the front window, peering through the blinds. Nothing but a smooth, unbroken field of white under the orange glow of the streetlight. No tracks, no person, just the wind. He told himself it was the house settling, or snow falling from a tree branch. He put his headset back on and tried to forget it. An hour later, his phone, sitting on the coffee table, buzzed. It was a notification from his new security camera, the one he'd mounted on the side of the house. Motion detected. He opened the app. The feed was mostly white and hazy from the falling snow, and the lens being partially covered. It was impossible to make anything out clearly. The clip was only 5 seconds long. Just as he was about to dismiss it, a dark shape slid past the lens, too close and too fast to be in focus. It was just a blur of black against the white, and then it was gone. The clip ended with a burst of static. His heart started pounding. What was that? An animal? A branch blowing in the wind? The ambiguity was worse than seeing something clearly. He didn't sleep well. The next morning, the sun was blindingly bright on the fresh snow. The storm had passed. He decided to shovel his walkway, needing to see for himself that everything was okay. He opened the front door, and his breath caught in his throat. There they were, footprints, but they weren't on the walkway or coming up from the street. They started at the edge of the woods bordering his property, and they made a direct line to his house. They followed the foundation, right up against the wall, a path no normal person would take. He followed the tracks around the side of the house. They led directly to the security camera, and continued on, circling the entire house. And then he saw the part that made his blood run cold. The tracks stopped directly beneath his bedroom window. The snow there was packed down, disturbed, as if someone had stood there for a very, very long time, just looking up. That second night was torture. He couldn't bring himself to sleep in his bedroom. He made a bed on the couch, leaving the TV on for the noise and light. He must have drifted off, because he was jolted awake by his phone lighting up again. Another motion alert. He fumbled for it, his hands shaking. He brought up the live feed. This time, the image was clearer. The snow had stopped, and pressed right up against the wall of his house was a dark figure. It was just standing there, motionless, hugging the shadows where the camera's night vision struggled to reach. As he was staring at the screen, the motion-activated floodlight on the corner of his house suddenly clicked on, washing the side yard in brilliant white light. The figure was gone. But at the same moment, the light came on. He heard a sound from right beside him. A soft tap on the living room window. Not the angry rap of a fist, but a gentle, questioning tap, as if from a single fingertip. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. He just sat there on the couch, frozen in place, staring at the window where the blinds were drawn. His mind was screaming, but his body was paralyzed. He stayed like that for what felt like an eternity. And then, through the thick glass and the hum of the heater, he heard it. It was so quiet he almost missed it. A low, guttural sound, muffled by the window. A laugh. It wasn't loud or manic. It was a quiet, amused little chuckle. Immediately after, he heard the distinct sound of footsteps crunching in the snow again, this time walking away, back towards the woods in a perfectly straight line. He waited until the sun came up before he even thought about moving. The police came, but there wasn't much they could do. They saw the footprints, noted the tap marks on the glass. They told him it was probably just a local prankster. But Mark knew it wasn't. To this day, he says the worst part wasn't the footprints or the figure on the camera. It was the sound of that laugh and the chilling realization that whoever was out there wasn't trying to get in. They were just letting him know they could. Winter has a way of making you feel safe, doesn't it? Tucked away, warm inside, with the world muffled by a blanket of white. That's what I thought, at least during my stay at this beautiful A-frame cabin deep in the woods. The first flakes were just starting to fall, big and lazy, as I got the wood stove going. The flames danced, casting a warm orange glow that made the whole place feel like a sanctuary. Outside, the trees were already turning into white silhouettes against a gray sky. Through the thin curtains, I could see the snowstorm picking up, a swirling curtain of white. The only sounds were the crackling and popping of the stove, and, every so often, the distant, deep groan of the lake ice shifting under the weight of the fresh snow. It was perfect, cozy, peaceful, and utterly isolated. But that feeling of being safe, of being tucked away from the world, it's a fragile thing. And as night fell, the cozy cabin began to feel more like a cage. The storm was a full-blown blizzard by the time I climbed up to the loft to sleep. The fire in the stove was still throwing light around the cabin, making shadows stretch and shrink in hypnotic patterns. I was just drifting off when I heard it, a faint rattling. I looked down from the loft, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. The latch on the front door, it was moving. Just a tiny, almost imperceptible jiggle. I told myself it was the wind, the old wood of the cabin settling. But then the shadows on the floor shifted in a way that didn't match the rhythm of the fire. It was subtle, but it was there. Something had blocked the light for just a second. My heart started pounding, and then I heard the sound that confirmed I wasn't alone. A soft crunch of footsteps in the snow, circling the cabin. Over and over. My breathing hitched, caught in my throat. I didn't dare make a sound. The wood of the cabin creaked, and for a terrifying moment, I imagined I could hear someone else breathing, right outside the walls, their breath mingling with the howling wind. I must have stayed frozen like that for hours, listening to the relentless, circling footsteps. I couldn't sleep, couldn't move. My eyes were locked on the windows, dark squares against the glowing interior. The frost had started to creep up the glass, creating beautiful, intricate patterns. But they didn't feel beautiful anymore. They felt like a screen, hiding whatever was out there. I slowly, carefully, crept down from the loft. My mind was screaming at me not to, but I had to see. I had to know. I moved toward the window closest to the door, my bare feet silent on the cold wood floor. The air was frigid near the glass. I reached out a trembling hand, my fingertip touching the frosted pane. And just as my finger made contact, I heard it. A soft tap. Tap. Right on the other side of the glass. It was so close. Too close. My blood ran cold. Then a whisper, thin and reedy like a teenager's voice, cut through the wind. Let me in. I scrambled back, falling onto the floor, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't make another sound for the rest of the night. I just sat there, huddled in the dark, waiting for the sun to rise, waiting for the footsteps to stop. When the first gray light of dawn finally filtered through the windows, the silence was deafening. The footsteps were gone. The wind had died down. It took all the courage I had to unlatch the door and push it open. The world outside was pristine, buried under a thick, undisturbed blanket of snow. Except it wasn't undisturbed. A perfect circle of human footprints was pressed into the snow, looping around and around the entire cabin. My eyes followed the tracks, and then I saw them. Drag marks, starting from the edge of the woods, leading right up to the cabin wall, and then stopping. It looked like someone had dragged something heavy through the snow, right alongside the path they'd walked all night. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air. I backed into the cabin, my hand shaking as I closed the door. My gaze fell on the window I had touched. The frost on the glass was thick, obscuring the view, but my breath had melted a small patch. I grabbed my flashlight, its beam trembling, and wiped away the condensation from the inside. There, on the outside of the glass, frozen into the layer of ice, were 5 streaks. Perfectly spaced, a handprint. Someone had been standing there, their hand pressed against the glass, just inches from my face. There was no music, no sound at all, except for the ragged gasp that escaped my lungs. The sanctuary had become a trap, and the silence of the morning was more terrifying than any noise the night had produced. The thing about driving in a blizzard at night is how it shrinks your world down to a tiny bubble. All you can see is what's directly in your headlights. The road, the swirling snow, the occasional flash of a guardrail. Everything else just disappears into a roaring white void. I was on a long, empty stretch of highway, the only one out in the storm, it seemed. The wind was howling, and the only sound was the constant crunch of my tires on the packed snow. I glanced at my rearview mirror, out of habit. Nothing but darkness and swirling flakes. A few minutes later, I glanced again. This time, there was something else. 2 pinpricks of light, far behind me, cutting through the blizzard. Another car. I felt a small sense of relief. It's nice to know you're not completely alone out there. But that relief didn't last long. The headlights behind me got closer and closer. Soon, they were right on my tail, their high beams flooding my car, reflecting off my mirrors and blinding me. The snowflakes lit up by their lights were like a dizzying strobe effect. It was aggressive, unnerving. I sped up a little, but they stayed right there. I slowed down, and they slowed down with me. I flicked on my right turn signal, pretending I was going to pull over. In my side mirror, I saw the right turn signal blink on in perfect sync. My heart began to pound against my ribs. My phone, connected to the car's Bluetooth, suddenly lit up. A text message. The automated voice read it out loud, flat, and robotic, cutting through the sound of the engine. Don't stop. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a road rage incident. This was something else. I floored it. The engine screamed in protest, tires struggling for grip on the icy road. But no matter how fast I went, the car behind me kept pace. Then it pulled out into the oncoming lane and drew up alongside me. We were side by side, hurtling through the blinding snow. I risked a glance. The other car was a dark sedan, beaten up with a missing hubcap on the front passenger side wheel. The blizzard seemed to intensify, the wind shaking my car. My own heartbeat was a frantic drum, trying to compete with the roar of the storm. My phone lit up again. Another text. The robotic voice was chillingly calm. Don't look at him. I snapped my head forward, staring at the road, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I could feel their presence beside me, a dark shape in my peripheral vision, keeping pace, waiting. Just when I thought my heart would explode, I saw them. Flashing red and blue lights, piercing the whiteout ahead. A police car coming toward us. The moment the lights were visible, the car beside me slammed on its brakes. I looked in my rearview mirror. The blinding headlights were gone. Instantly. 1 second they were there. The next, just darkness. The road behind me was empty again. The police car passed, and I was alone. The static on the radio, which I hadn't even noticed was there, suddenly cut out, leaving an unnerving silence. My breathing was ragged, but it slowly began to even out. I drove for another hour, not seeing another soul, until I finally pulled into a brightly lit rest stop, the first sign of civilization I'd seen. The sun was coming up. I sat in my car for a long time, the engine off, just trying to process what had happened. I picked up my phone to call the police, to report it. I went to my messages to show them the texts, but they were gone. The message thread was empty. There were just 2 blank entries, timestamps confirming when they'd been received, but the words themselves had been deleted. My hands were shaking. Was I going crazy? Did I imagine it all? Then I saw a discarded newspaper on the passenger seat. I must have picked it up at a gas station days ago. And on the front page was a photo. A photo of a car, part of a story about a recent string of disappearances along this very highway. It was a dark, beaten-up sedan, and on the front passenger side wheel, there was a hubcap missing. Snow doesn't just hide things. It shows you exactly where something stood. If these stories felt real, share this with someone who hates winter nights. Subscribe to the Untold archive. And if it's snowing where you are, check your windows